It's the final Friday of the regular season, so let's answer some questions from the mailbag.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I do some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. Well, the Royals later on tonight will be taking on the Atlanta Braves in game one of a three-game series, the final three-game series and regular season series of the year. If the Royals can maybe grab one win here or hope for a couple more losses from Minnesota, should feel pretty good about where they line up going in to Tuesday for the wild card round. But with it being our final Mailbag Friday of the regular season, not final Mailbag Friday, just for the regular season. Don't want to waste any time. We got a lot of questions, and I feel like I've got a good idea what a lot of people are going to be asking about. So the first one here comes from Cole. Do you think we can beat any of these teams in the playoffs? I certainly think it's possible, but the way you have to evaluate the playoffs is really not taking away a lot from the regular season. I mean, I think last year was a perfect example of don't read into regular season numbers. Don't read into September numbers. That for sure. I think it does not matter if you are playing well or playing poorly in September. Once you get into the playoffs, it's a free-for-all again. It doesn't really matter what that final series looked like, what those final 10 series looked like, because it's a completely different playing field now. You are in a do-or-die scenario, and some teams crumble under that, and some teams thrive in situations like that. I mean, the Rangers last September, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Royals broadcast had brought this up. One point in the September stretch, they were like 4-16. I mean, it was something ridiculous like that. Like nearly lost their playoff spot. They had to go all the way up until the final weekend. They get in, sweep Tampa Bay, sweep Baltimore, win in 7 against the Astros, and go on to win the World Series. It's just unpredictable. So do I think the Royals can beat some of these teams? Absolutely. I mean, if you make the postseason, you're good enough. You're good enough to beat anybody. It's not like last year where the Marlins went into Philadelphia and it just seemed like a mismatch from the get-go. I think everybody on the American League side can beat anybody. I don't think there's a true dominant team because there's no 100-win team. There's no pure, lethal, unstoppable force on the American League side. So, yes, my question is they can beat anybody on the American League side. Do I think they're going to be the last remaining team on the American League side? I do not. I would love to be proved wrong, but I'm just going to play the odds that I think there will be another team that gets the best of them. But if they can get past somebody in the wild card series, it's up to anything at that point. You can't really predict anything because the playoffs is just that kind of craziness, and which is why it makes it, in my opinion, the best postseason sport in baseball. I'm biased. I'm a baseball guy, but postseason baseball is a special and unique type of thing, and hopefully the Royals can be appearing in that next week. Next question comes from Conrad. I'm here in D.C. and made it out to both the night game victories, so good for you, Conrad. Anytime you go out on the road and see the Royals win, you've done a lot better than me because I've never seen the Royals win on the road, and I've gone more than a few times, so maybe I'm the bad luck charm. But he says, plenty of other Royals fans out here. I want to know what you currently think would be the ideal Royals wild card game, what the lineup is in a vacuum, not considering the pitching matchup. Thanks, and have been loving the pod all season. Well, appreciate the kind words, Conrad. I would say I think I've answered this question before. My ideal starting lineup for the wild card game would be Tommy Pham leading off in left. I would have Bobby Witt Jr. in the 2-hole at shortstop. I would have Salvi. Well, actually, I take that back. I want Salvi back in the 4-hole, I think. I liked Michael Massey in the 3-hole last night, or 2 nights ago it was. So I go Massey in the 3-hole at second base, Salvi behind the plate. He's going to be in the cleanup spot. In the 5th spot, I'll go with Yuli Gurriel at first base. In the 6th hole, I will go with, let's say, Hunter Renfroe there. 7 hole, I'll go Paul DeYoung at third base. In the 8 hole, who am I left with now? I need a DH and I need Isbell. So Isbell will hit 9th. DH spot can be Robbie Grossman, can be Freddie Fermin. You could put Garcia at third and then DeYoung in the DH spot, but I think that's what I would go with my ideal starting lineup. And then I think the other part of the question was the matchup. So it looks like just the lineup here. So I think if they get the Orioles, they will be seeing Corbin Burnes in game 1. If they were to get the Astros in game 1, I want to say it'll be Framber Valdez or maybe Hunter Brown with the way that he's looked. But you can't go wrong with Houston's number 1. They've got a bunch of guys out there that can get you out, and I think Houston will be a very problematic matchup. But again, as I said, anything's possible in the postseason. But do appreciate the kind words and the question coming from Conrad. This one comes from from Steven. Do you think Vinnie returns this weekend? I do not. I'm still not super optimistic that he's going to be back this season. It was great to see him in the cage, swinging, putting some over the fence. That shows you how quickly he's progressing. But I also am still under the impression that the timeline has not changed, that if they do get him back, it would probably be in the ALCS, though there was some rumblings on Twitter today of, maybe if they got to the ALDS, he would have a chance to play if he really sped things up. But I just don't think they're in a spot where they feel like they need to rush him and, potentially worsen the injury, right? He seems good now. I think you need to build it up, make sure he's 100%, because having Vinnie in the lineup at 70 or 80% just doesn't seem very effective to me. Bosnas asked if, even though we won today, our playoff odds dropped about 5%. So not really a question there, but a statement. I think to me, that's more so about the Tigers. The Tigers sweeping Seattle certainly didn't help anything. They can't lose right now. They are unbelievably loaded. They are on a tear. They think they can beat anybody. They might be the most dangerous team on the American League side right now because they've got a bullpen that is thriving. They got a rotation that's thriving, and their offense is doing just enough. So that's why I think it went down a little bit. But to me, I still think the Royals are in a really good spot going into this Atlanta series beginning tonight. This one comes from MJ Melendez Enthusiast. In your opinion, obviously play to win every game, but is there a better matchup with Baltimore or Houston, assuming New York doesn't choke this AL East lead? I think the better matchup is Baltimore. Not trying to play into what happened in the regular season at Minute Maid Park between the Royals and Astros. That was a weird series for the Royals because they lost Vinnie in game 1. I think if Vinnie was healthy the entire series, I think they probably split that series. But because you had that devastating blow, losing Ursig and Vinnie on the same play and blowing the game, that just impacted the other 3 games. So I'm not saying it's impossible to go into Minute Maid Park, but I've discussed this before. The Astros just have a playoff pedigree. No matter how good or bad they are, they're tough to beat. Baltimore, I can't really say it's a playoff pedigree. They got swept last year, and they've had a really bad second half. They've been playing well of late, but still, overall in the second half, they've struggled. They got bullpen issues. And after Corbin Burnes and Zach Eflin, I would be curious who would be pitching in a Game 3 elimination series in the wild card round. But first things first, the Royals have to make sure they can get the 5th spot in the playoff picture and then force a Game 3 elimination game. But if that was the case, the Royals would have a better chance of winning a Game 3 against Baltimore than they would against Houston. Mike asked, should the Royals be pitching Lugo tomorrow? If Lugo pitches tomorrow, there's a chance that the Royals have both Lugo and Reagans for the playoff series on regular rest. I do not think they're going to bump Lugo up. I think they're going to leave everybody as is right now, because if they lose tonight and things stay alive, they want to be able to fall back on Seth Lugo and Cole Reagans. And I think the way Matt Quatrero is approaching this is that if things start going sideways, you would rather get yourself in the regular season and think about what you might do in the playoffs than start thinking about the playoffs before you've even punched your ticket. So if there was a scenario in which the Royals had to go all the way to game 162 and throw Cole Reagans, but they get in, Michael Walker will start game 1. And then it would circle back around to game 2 is maybe Seth Lugo on short rest, and then Cole Reagans in game 3. But that's if they need to go to game 162. If they don't, they would have Cole Reagans in game 1. They could have Seth Lugo probably in game 3. They'll bump Michael Walker up to game 2 if Lugo throws on Saturday. But they could also move him up a spot and pitch on short rest. But to me, I think it'll be Brady Singer tomorrow, and that's going to be who they're rolling with, and see if he can get one more good start before the postseason. And I've said this many times, assuming they get there. We'll take our first break of the show. When we come back, still plenty more questions to get into in this edition of a Mailbag Friday. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to one of our newer sponsors in Robinhood. With Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for the high society. Now the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.5% APY on uninvested cash, receive unlimited 1% deposit bonuses, and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on an IRA account. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of a high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Want to dive back into our next set of questions here. This one comes from the great Cornelio. Why couldn't we just win one game against the Tigers and one against the Giants? Well, that's the shoulda, woulda, coulda type talk, and it was not a good stretch for the Royals. They were tense, they were nervous, they were stressed, and if they would have just taken one against Detroit, they had their opportunity last Monday with a 5-1 lead, I believe it was, after the Bobby Witt Jr. Grand Slam. You felt like they should have won that one. You felt like they had many opportunities to win on Tuesday, but the Tigers are beating everybody. I think they're 30-11 in their last 41, something stupid like that. The Giants, hey, I know that Giants team, I think on paper didn't look that good. I've seen the Giants in person this year. They're a lot better than you think. And if anybody paid attention after that Royals series, what the Giants did to the Diamondbacks, who were in a very similar spot as the Royals, they did worse things to the Diamondbacks than they did to the Royals. And in fact, in the 5 games after they got eliminated, they outscored their opponents 30-3. So I think it came down to the Royals were not playing well. I don't think they could have beaten even some of the worst teams out there, but they were playing 2 teams that were just playing good baseball. So that's why they couldn't get one game there. It felt like they were tight, they were nervous, they were stressed. But now they've won 3 in a row, swept the series, and have a really good spot in the wild card race. But yes, it would have been a lot easier if they would have gotten it done at least once in that series against San Francisco or Detroit, because we wouldn't be worrying about what has to happen going into the final weekend of the year. This one comes from Tyler. Do you prefer Singer or Marsh on the mound tonight, against the Braves? I think I'm going to roll with Brady Singer here. I would love to see Alec Marsh utilized in a bulk role where if Brady Singer doesn't look like the good version of Brady Singer, which hasn't really appeared in the last 4 to 5 starts, I would love to see the Royals go to Alec Marsh because that would be his role in the postseason. In the postseason, if a starter doesn't go deep, Daniel Lynch and Alec Marsh will basically have the same role. Daniel Lynch might be able to go a little bit longer, where Alec Marsh, in my opinion, is probably good for a 2-inning workload. But I would love to see it. In fact, the best case scenario is tonight things get wrapped up. And you don't need to worry about anything on Saturday and Sunday except for what seed you may be. And I would love to see Alec Marsh get a high leverage role on Saturday and Sunday. Now, that's a perfect world. That's getting ahead of myself a little bit. But I want to see what he looks like out of the bullpen. I want to see if he can air it out a little bit, if that swing and miss stuff really translates well to the back end of the bullpen. But again, that's worrying about things that I don't think we need to be worrying too much about at this point in time. But I like the fact that Brady Singer's going on Friday, because if it came down to it in a divisional series, Brady Singer's going to have to start. Alec Marsh isn't going to start in a playoff game, at least not in my opinion. I think they would rather go Michael Lorenzen, assuming he's built back up a little bit and what his health looks like. But I think Brady Singer would get a start over Alec Marsh if it came down to it in a playoff game, and I expect him to start tonight against the Atlanta Braves. This one comes from Aiden asking about the Game 1 wildcard lineup. The only difference, and I'm going to throw this in because I have been asked this a few times, if they do go to Houston and they take on Framber Valdez, I believe Matt Quatrero will go with that righty-heavy lineup again. I think you'll see Robbie Grossman. I think you will see Garrett Hampson maybe, because that's what he's done all season long. When there's been a lefty in the lineup and that lefty has, favorable splits toward left-handed hitters and not so much towards right-handed hitters, Matt Quatrero loads up that lineup with righties. Now, what I would love to see next year, and probably one of the first things the Royals need to address in the offseason, is bringing in more stable hitters. They need to go after guys that were good this year and aren't needing bounce-back years. The Royals have a lot of holes in that lineup, and when Bobby Witt Jr. and Salvador Perez aren't hitting well, it shows. Right? And last offseason, because of how much they spent on pitching, they had to really roll the dice with bounce-back guys and guys that weren't really being approached by other teams. But they're going to have some questions to answer about MJ Melendez, about Maikel Garcia, about, Freddie Fermin. They're going to have questions to ask about, Michael Massey, or answer, excuse me. So those guys have done enough this year and have done well enough. But I don't think every single one of those guys is going to be in a starting role next year, because I think the Royals would like to have a very steady lineup instead of always having to play the matchup with a lot of different guys. But also Matt Quatrero loves playing it that way. So to that question, Aiden, if it was a lefty they're facing, I would expect the righties all in there. I would expect MJ Melendez to be on the bench. I would likely expect Michael Massey to be on the bench, and the Royals to load up that lineup with righties and try to jump on somebody like a Framber Valdez. But after that, the Orioles, I think other than Cade Povich, don't have another lefty in there because John Means isn't going to be pitching. So the Orioles would have all righties, and after Framber Valdez, the Astros would have all righties in their lineup. So I would expect a lot of the same there. You heard already what my wild card lineup would be if it was against the Orioles and Corbin Burns, and if it was against the Astros and Framber Valdez. Next one comes from No Name. What is the potential wildcard rotation if Lugo and Reagans throw this weekend? Also, how much is Ursig available this series after throwing 3 straight? Well, Matt Quatrero spoke to a lot of the media members today. I believe Andy Rogers put this out. Actually, it was yesterday, now that I think about it. But of the bullpen, since they've pitched better of late, he's trusting more guys to pitch multiple days. Angel Serpa pitched multiple days, all 3 days, in fact, in Washington, and so did Lucas Ursig. I think he will be available on Saturday, likely. I would be shocked if he goes into the game tonight, unless it's do or die at that point, which it wouldn't be. I just think you'd rather save Lucas Ursig for Saturday and Sunday if you needed him to. I think pitching on 4 days in a row, that could lead to some problems. That could wear out a guy when you don't want to wear him out if you are going to play in the postseason. So the Royals might need to get a little bit more creative in getting the last couple outs tonight if they do have a lead over the Atlanta Braves. And as for the rotation, if they do throw Lugo and Reagans, I think it would be Michael Wacha as the game 1 starter. You might have to go to Brady Singer in game 2, which would line you back up to go Lugo game 3, or you could go Lugo on short rest for Wednesday, and then the elimination game, if it did happen in game 3, you could go to Cole Reagans. But if they do have to use those two, I have a lot of confidence Michael Wacha would be the game 1 starter for the Royals. This one comes from Josh. What is the most worrisome thing going into the postseason for you? I think with who is left for me in the bullpen and a shorter rotation in the postseason, I immediately have pause about the offense and how hot and cold they've been, because one cold game can end your season. Well, Josh, I can probably tell you this. I sound like a psychopath in this, or sound like somebody who's got no nerves or no emotion. I'm treating the postseason, if they get there, a lot more free and easy than I've treated this last week of games. Because if the Royals get in, they're playing with house money. But if the question is about what worries me, I mean, yeah, it would be the starting rotation not going deep into games and then turning it over to the bullpen. But I like the challenge of seeing what this team is capable of. They have no pressure on them. Zero pressure if they get it. Everybody else has pressure. Them and the Tigers would be the only teams really without any pressure. Cleveland now has pressure because they won a division and got a first round bye. Baltimore has pressure because they got swept out of the playoffs last year. The Yankees have pressure because they haven't won a World Series in 15 years. And the Astros somewhat have pressure because they're a division winner. And there's a lot of expectations for them to go far in the postseason. I said they, at one point in time, didn't have pressure. Now I think they do, just because people are rooting against them. And when people are rooting against you, you do have some sort of added pressure. But the Royals and Tigers, if they both get in, they've got no pressure. But if it's a matter of beating teams and feeling anxious about things not going well for them, I'm not overly concerned about the offense because they're hot and cold. That's who they are. I'm not going to get too caught up in it. To me, I think it would be trying to bridge the gap if somebody only goes 5 innings. Who's the 6th inning guy? Who's the 7th inning guy? We know Bubic and Ursa would be the 8th and 9th inning guy, but how do you get those 6 outs? That, to me, would be the most worrisome and a hostile environment against a team that's got a lot of talent in their lineup, and both the Astros and the Orioles would have a lot of talent to do damage and may dictate the game at that point. But even then, I would go into it just feeling so free and easy about it, just enjoying the moment and being so thankful that playoff baseball is back. I know that wasn't really your question of if I'm going to be nervous. It's more so about what worries you about this team. They're playing with house money. They're not a perfect team. There's a lot of flaws to this team. But I think being a flawed team and being a young and inexperienced team, it can make you dangerous if you get hot at the right time. And hopefully that bleeds into next week if the Royals can get in and they can carry that into the wild card series. All right, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll wrap it up with all of our questions next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. We got 2 sponsors I want to give a shout out to, beginning with Booking.com. The U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about are all available to you now with Booking.com. With hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay even in your rival city during the postseason. Maybe it's time to taste test your rival's competition with stadium cuisine. Luckily on Booking.com, you can find the stadium that's just right for you. With Booking.com's wide variety of choice across the U.S., you can go incognito to your rival cities. Booking.com can help you book a stay that's close to your home teams or your rival stadium. No matter what team you're rooting for this postseason, Booking.com can make you a fan of any city. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts to cute bed and breakfast stays, Booking.com has so many choices around the world. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today at Booking.com. Booking.yeah. Also want to tell you about PrizePicks. And with PrizePicks, it's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. And unlike other apps on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out even if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Well, we have just a couple more questions here to close out our final regular season Mailbag Friday. And Brent's question is about Vinnie taking BP. Should they hold off bringing him back this season? I'm kind of leaning that way just because, batting practice can be a little bit different than a live game. You're seeing different speeds. There's a chance that you could get injured in that. I think the Royals are going to be rolling with Yuli Gurriel in the postseason. And if it gets cut short, then it gets cut short. But I just don't know if Vinny's going to be 100% until a little bit later on in the postseason. And even then, it's going to be tough to put him out there. But I hope Vinny gets a chance. He is such a huge part of this team, and everybody felt it when he went down. But to me, I think this is about making sure he also doesn't ruin anything for 2025. Of course, you would want to have him out there. And if he's 100% and you give him the nod, then I'd be curious to see what he does. But even the BP stuff, I don't know if I'm there yet where the timeline gets sped up a couple of weeks. I think you got to take this process as smoothly as possible so he doesn't re-aggravate anything. RB Carr asked, do they carry 12 or 13 pitchers in the wild card series? And what arms would make the roster besides Lynch, Serpa, Long, Bubich, Ursig, Schreiber, Lugo, Reagans, and Waka? Well, that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I think Hernandez makes the roster. I think Marsh makes the roster. I think, who else am I missing here? Lugo, Reagans, and Waka. Singer there. And then the last one would be Lorenzen. Yeah, so those would be the other 4 I would add in there to the 9. And I feel pretty confident that's what the Royals are going to be rolling with in the postseason, again, assuming that they get there. Briley asked, would Vinnie be available to jump into playing with the Royals since rehab stints aren't available? I think so. Yeah, if you get healthy at the right time, you don't need a rehab stint. They would probably just try to bring him along with some BP and routine ground balls and stuff in the batting practice part of warm-ups. But no, there's no rehab stint he could go into, so he would have to be added before a series. So for a wild card series, he would have to be on that roster and be ready to go. And I don't think that's going to be likely for Vinnie. It would probably have to be the ALDS or the ALCS before he would be added to the roster. Waka season asked, ideal 1 through 4 in the lineup in a wild card series. Pham, Bobby, Gurriel, Salvi would be great in my opinion, although could see Massey in the 3-hole as well, not including Vinnie in this scenario. I think right there is the perfect answer. If it's a lefty on the mound, I think we'll see Pham, Bobby, Gurriel, Salvi, or Salvi and Gurriel. And then if there's a righty on the bump, I would put Massey in the 3-hole and bump Gurriel out of that top 4, but probably Gurriel is in the 5 or the 6-hole at that point. Next one comes from TJ. Do you see Q constantly changing the starting lineup during the postseason, or do you expect more consistency than it has been? The Royals have won some games this year with some wacky lineups. I'm not saying he's going to put Adam Frazier and Garrett Hampson out there in the same lineup, although Frazier came through in a big way, his biggest hit as a Royal yesterday in that win over the Nationals. But to me, I think we'll see a kind of a combination of he'll keep pretty consistent with guys like Michael Massey out there and Gurriel and Pham and Bobby and Salvi. But depending on the matchup, if there's a lefty out there, I think he's going to go with a righty-heavy lineup because that's what he's done all season long, and I don't see that changing just because it's the postseason. Bobby Witt Jr.'s bat asked, would you rather play Baltimore or Houston in the wild card? I'm going with Baltimore here. Even if the Royals were to lose a series against Baltimore, I think they're the better matchup than Houston. Houston just has so many arms to worry about that you got to worry about Jose Altuve and Yordan Alvarez, though Alvarez is dealing with a knee issue where there's a lot of inflammation there. So you could catch Houston at the right time, but beating a team that no matter what their record goes deep into the postseason, that's really hard to do. And Minute Maid Park feels like just a hell zone, if you will, for the Royals. I know they won there in 2015 and they swept them last year with the 2023 squad, but they got swept this year. This is a different team. It's a different year, and it just felt weird in that series. It wasn't everything. Vinnie went down, Ursig went down, and there was an emotional impact there. But to me, Baltimore's just playing worse in the second half than Houston is, and I think Baltimore has a lot more pressure than Houston is. So I would probably side with playing the Orioles in the first round than I would the Houston Astros. And lastly, Michael asked, what is Lorenzen's status? He took himself out, but did he re-aggravate the hamstring or just easing back in? Seemed like the Royals took him out as a precautionary measure, had lower body fatigue because of that hamstring, might have felt it tightening up a little bit, and the Royals pulled him from that start. So they were always planning on him having a short start. Daniel Lynch was warming up before that inning, so I don't believe that Lorenzen was going to work deep into that game at all. That was likely his last inning, but they probably told him, hey, if you start to feel any sort of fatigue, you feel any tightness, any cramp, signal us, we're taking you out. And that's what we saw. Lorenzen pointed the dugout, said, felt something, they came out, they didn't even talk to him. They said, okay, we're bringing in Daniel Lynch, we got to make sure you're fresh. So I don't think he re-aggravated anything, probably just easing himself back in, and he might be in a limited role for the Royals, assuming they can get into the postseason. Well, thank you for all the questions that you guys sent in through YouTube and through Twitter or X. Always appreciate it, and hopefully I gave you the best possible answers that I could. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB. Prepare for the Fall Classic with Sully, who has it all covered every single day. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, we'll be off Saturday and Sunday. Of course, you enjoy this final regular season series of the year. And hopefully on Monday, we can recap it all. But more importantly, preview a wild card series. So fingers crossed for that. Until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.